I've walked this trail every morning for 3 years. Same time, same route, same silence. Duke, my German shepherd, knows it better than I know my own house. He's 6 now, retired like me, though neither of us talks much about what we're retired from. The rain came hard that night. By dawn, the forest floor was soft, and Duke's nose was working overtime. I didn't think much of it. He always finds something. A deer trail, a rabbit warren, the ghost smell of something that passed through hours before. But this morning felt different. His ears were up. His pace quickened. We were maybe 2 kilometers into the walk when Duke veered hard left, off the main path. I almost called him back. That's not our route. But something in the way he moved, that old instinct I recognized from 15 years wearing a badge, made me follow. The trees thickened. The ground dipped toward a ravine. Duke's breathing quickened. He wasn't hunting. He was searching. Then I saw it. A makeshift shelter, barely visible beneath a fallen oak and twisted branches. A tarp, a sleeping bag, an empty water bottle. Someone had been here. And recently, Duke barked once, sharp, deliberate, and pressed toward the shelter. That's when I heard the voice, soft, terrified. "Please, please don't." A woman emerged, hands up, eyes wild with fear. She was maybe 30, dark hair matted, wearing a jacket 2 sizes too large. Her face was bruised, not fresh, but old enough to have faded to yellow-green at the edges. "It's okay," I said. The words automatic from 2 decades of patrol work. "I'm not here to hurt you." She looked at Duke, then back at me. Her hands shook. "Are you a cop?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. The truth is complicated. I was a cop. I am a cop, probably, in ways that don't fade when you turn in your badge. But saying it felt like a lie. "No," I said finally. "I'm just someone out for a walk." She didn't believe me. But she didn't run either. Chapter 2. The story. Her name was Sarah. She'd been in the woods for 11 days. We sat by my kitchen table, me, Duke, and a woman who looked like she hadn't eaten in a week. I made coffee. She drank 3 cups, without speaking, her eyes locked on the window like she expected someone to smash through it. "You need to take me to the police," she said finally. I waited. "No, I can't." She stopped herself. "I can't go to the police. They're looking for me. They think I did it." "Did what?" "Killed my husband." The words hung in the air like something that might shatter if we moved too quickly. Sarah pulled up her sleeve. Old scars, thin and deliberate, ran up her forearm like a map of surrender. Newer bruises mottled her upper arm, finger marks dark purple against pale skin. "He did that," she said. 2 weeks before he died. He threw me down the stairs, broke 2 ribs. I went to the hospital, filed a report. The officer who took my statement..." She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "He knew my husband. They'd gone to high school together. Nothing happened. No charges. No follow-up." I recognized the pattern. I'd seen it before. I'd enabled it before. 2 weeks later, my husband came home drunk, angrier than usual. He had a bottle of whiskey and a loaded gun. He said he was going to end it all, make it look like I did it. He was going to shoot himself in a way that looked like my crime, and I'd go to prison for it. She paused. Her hands trembled around the coffee cup. He stumbled. The gun fell. I grabbed it. We struggled. It went off. "Self-defense," I said. "That's not what the detective said. His name was Hendricks, my husband's friend. He came to the scene, looked at the evidence, and decided it was murder. Said I staged everything. Said my injuries were old, that I was lying. He arrested me that night." My chest tightened. I knew Hendricks. We'd worked together years back. He was good cop once, or he pretended to be. I was in county lockup for 3 days. The judge set bail at $50,000. I didn't have it. But a public defender, a woman named Morrison, she believed me. She said the evidence was weak, that Hendricks had contaminated the scene, that we had a real chance at trial. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "They found Morrison dead in her apartment, Overdose. The file says suicide, but Morrison didn't use drugs. She didn't even drink. I felt the weight of it then, the thing I'd spent 20 years ignoring. I ran, Sarah said. I knew if I stayed, I'd disappear too. Chapter 3. The Hunt. That night, I sat in my office, a small room I'd built as a place to think, though mostly it was a place to hide, and I pulled up old news archives on my computer. The case was real. Sarah's husband, Michael Chen, had been killed 18 months ago. The trial was set for next month. Sarah Chen was considered armed and dangerous, though there was no mention of weapons. The detective in charge was indeed James Hendricks, now a sergeant. I found the article about Sarah's public defender 3 lines into a local news brief. Attorney Sarah Morrison, 34, found dead in her apartment. Police say preliminary investigation indicates suicide. She was the public defender assigned to the Chen case. No mention of the toxicology report, no detail about how someone who didn't drink had a blood alcohol content of 0.31. Duke pressed his head against my leg. He always knows when I'm spiraling. If you're following this rescue so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I made a call to someone I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, a retired FBI forensic accountant named Rodriguez, who'd helped me investigate a corruption case back when I still believed the system could fix itself. I didn't tell him everything. I just asked him to look into Hendricks's financials over the past 2 years. 3 hours later, he called back. Your boy Hendricks bought a house in cash last year, $240,000. Before that, he was living paycheck to paycheck like the rest of us. I thanked him and hung up. Duke jumped onto the couch beside me, something he only does when he senses I'm about to make a decision I can't walk back from. He knew. Dogs always know. Chapter 4. The Risk. The next morning, I drove Sarah to a safe house, a cabin 30 kilometers north that belonged to a woman I'd worked with years ago, someone who'd left the force for the same reasons I had. Her name was Keisha, and she didn't ask questions. How long? Keisha asked, loading Sarah with supplies. A few days, maybe longer. Hendricks? Yeah. Keisha nodded like she understood the weight of that single name. She probably did. I drove back to town and went to the one place I'd avoided since retirement, the police station. Detective Hendricks wasn't in. His partner, a younger cop named Torres, told me he was out on a call. I left a message asking him to meet me at my house that evening. I added, "It's about Sarah Chen." Then I waited. Duke paced. I paced. We did laps around the living room like animals in a cage. By evening, my jaw ached from clenching. Hendricks arrived at 6:47 p.m. He looked older than I remembered, heavier, tired. The kind of tired that comes from knowing you're sinking and not knowing how to swim back up. "Hell of a thing," he said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. Duke watched him from the corner, perfectly still. "Woman kills her husband and everyone's supposed to feel sorry for her. She didn't kill him. Evidence says different. The evidence says she defended herself. You know that. You contaminated the scene. You ignored her injuries. You let her attorney die and didn't investigate it as a murder." Hendricks's face went pale, then red. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know someone paid you $240,000. I know it happened right after you locked up Sarah Chen. I know Michael Chen's family has money, old money, connected money. And I know you were drowning." "Get out of my house," Hendricks said quietly. "Not yet. You're going to withdraw the charges against Sarah. You're going to reopen the investigation into Morrison's death. You're going to testify about the contamination of the crime scene. Or what? Or I go to the FBI with Rodriguez's findings, Morrison's toxicology report, and everything else I've collected. And you spend the rest of your life in prison for murder." Hendricks stood. His hand moved toward his belt, toward the gun he still wore. Duke moved faster. The sound was terrifying, a growl that seemed to come from the earth itself. Duke didn't jump. He just positioned himself between Hendricks and me, every muscle coiled, every instinct alive. "Call your dog off," Hendricks said. "No." We stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably 30 seconds. Then Hendricks backed toward the door, his eyes never leaving Duke. "You're making a mistake," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm finally making the right one." Chapter 5. The Fracture. 2 days later, Hendricks was arrested. The evidence was overwhelming once someone actually looked. Morrison's toxicology report showed traces of a paralytic agent mixed with alcohol, something that wouldn't show up on a standard screening, but that Rodriguez's contacts found immediately. The autopsy photos showed defensive wounds on her hands that had been ignored or buried. The financial trail led directly to Michael Chen's father, a wealthy businessman with connections to organized crime. The story broke in the local paper. Corruption charges filed against Sergeant James Hendricks, public defender's death reopened as murder. But the fallout was worse than I expected. Within 48 hours, I received a visit from 2 FBI agents. They weren't there to thank me. They were there because someone had filed a report claiming I was harboring a fugitive. I didn't deny it. "She's innocent," I told them. "The detective who charged her was corrupt. The public defender assigned to her case was murdered. I have evidence." The agents, a woman named Chen, no relation to Sarah's dead husband, though she didn't correct my assumption, and a man named Walsh, listened without expression. They took my statement, they took my evidence. Then they left to retrieve Sarah. I drove to the cabin that night and found her already packed. "They came this afternoon," Sarah said. "They were kind. They said I'd be safe." "You will be? What about you?" I didn't have an answer. There were laws about harboring fugitives, about obstruction of justice. My actions had been illegal, even if they were right, even if they'd saved her life. Duke rested his head on Sarah's lap. He'd bonded with her in those few days the way animals do, completely, without reservation. "Thank you," she said, "for believing me. I'm sorry it took finding you in the woods. I'm sorry I ever became the kind of man who needed to be reminded what justice actually looks like." Chapter 6. The Collapse. 3 weeks later, I was charged with harboring a fugitive and obstruction of justice. The irony wasn't lost on me. The system I'd served for 20 years was now turning on me, not because I'd broken the law, but because I'd exposed its corruption. My lawyer was Rodriguez's sister, a woman named Alejandra, who'd spent 15 years fighting cases like mine. She was good. She was angry. "This is retaliation," she said in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd confronted Hendricks. "They're making an example of you. They want cops to know that blowing the whistle, even when you're right, costs you everything." "I know," I said. "You might go to prison." "I know. For saving someone's life. I know. If this story has you hooked, hit like. It helps us bring more true rescues to light." Duke pressed against my leg. The trial was set for 6 weeks out. The media was having a field day, retired cop versus corrupt detective, but the narrative was shifting. The department wanted me to look like a loose cannon, a vigilante, someone who couldn't be trusted. The Chen family, meanwhile, had gone silent. Michael Chen's father had hired a team of lawyers that made my public defender look like a law student. They were working every angle, every contact, every pressure point in the system. 2 weeks into my legal battle, I received an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, me with a clear shot of my house in the background. Below it, typed on plain paper, "Drop the charges and we'll drop ours. Continue and your dog won't be so lucky next time." I called Alejandra immediately. She called the FBI. They said it was a credible threat and offered protective custody. I refused, but I sent Sarah a message. "Don't come back. Not for the trial. Not for me. Not for anything." Her response came within minutes. I'm testifying. They murdered Morrison to protect him. If I don't speak, nothing changes. I knew she was right. I also knew what it would cost her. Chapter 7. The Truth. The trial began on a cold Tuesday morning in March. The courtroom was packed. Local news cameras lined the hallway. The judge was a woman named Patricia Reeves, someone I'd never worked with but whose reputation was solid. Fair, intelligent, unwilling to tolerate corruption. The prosecution's case was straightforward. I'd broken the law by harboring a fugitive. My intentions didn't matter. The law was clear. Alejandra's defense was messier because the truth is messier. She called Rodriguez to testify about Hendrix's finances. She called a forensic expert who detailed how the original crime scene had been contaminated. She called a toxicologist who explained the paralytic agent found in Morrison's system. And she called Sarah. Sarah walked into that courtroom in a dark blue dress, her hands steady, her eyes clear. She told the jury everything: the abuse, the night Michael died, the corrupt detective, the murdered attorney. She spoke without drama, without embellishment, just the truth of what had happened to her. When the cross-examination began, the prosecution's lawyer tried to paint her as a manipulative woman who'd seduced me into breaking the law. It was vicious and transparent. But Sarah didn't break. She looked at the jury and said, "He saved my life." Not because he wanted to break the law, because he couldn't live with himself if he didn't. Hendrix was in the courtroom. He watched her with an expression I couldn't read. Rage, maybe, or the hollow look of someone watching their life burn from the inside. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, not guilty on all charges. When the foreman read the verdict, Sarah cried. Alejandra squeezed my shoulder, and I felt something shift inside me. Not relief exactly, but something like permission. Permission to believe that the system, for all its corruption, could still produce justice. That one person willing to risk everything could actually matter. Chapter 8. The Revelation. The fallout was swift. Hendrix was convicted of Morrison's murder and corruption charges. He'd received 35 years. Michael Chen's father was indicted on charges of conspiracy and murder for hire. Several police officers in his pocket were suspended pending investigation. The story made national news. "Retired cop defies corrupt system to save innocent woman" was the headline everyone ran with. My phone rang constantly. Journalists, lawyers, advocacy groups asking me to speak, to consult, to fight more battles. I turned them all down. What people wanted was a hero narrative. What I'd actually done was commit crimes, real crimes, even if they'd produced justice. The system had worked eventually, but only because I'd stepped outside of it. That wasn't heroic. That was a failure of the institution I'd served. Sarah moved to the city and started law school. She wanted to do what Morrison had tried to do, defend people the system had abandoned. She sent me a photo of her first day, standing outside the law school, smiling like someone who'd been given a second life. Duke got a commendation from the Animal Services Department. They didn't understand what he'd really done. It wasn't just finding Sarah, it was forcing me to find myself. One evening, 6 months after the trial, I received a visit from Torres, the younger cop who'd worked with Hendrix. He sat at my kitchen table, uncomfortable in civilian space, and told me something I needed to hear. "There are more," he said. "More cases like Sarah's. More people in the system being protected. More people like Morrison who disappeared or changed their testimony. I've been looking, trying to figure out what to do with what I found." "Why are you telling me?" I asked. "Because you showed me it was possible to say no, to risk it, to actually believe that justice matters more than the badge." He left me with a file, 20 pages of documented corruption, hidden evidence, pressure campaigns, dismissed cases, real crimes buried under official paperwork. I called Alejandra. Chapter 9. The Peace. The work took 2 years. 2 years of late nights, court appearances, investigations. 2 years of helping other lawyers uncover what had been hidden. 2 years of watching the system slowly, painfully, begin to correct itself. Not because it wanted to, but because enough people forced it to. Sarah graduated law school. She took a job defending people accused of crimes by the same system that had targeted her. We didn't see each other often. Different cities, different lives now, but we'd text occasionally. She'd send photos of cases she'd won, lives she'd saved through the law instead of defiance. Alejandra became something of a legend in legal circles. The cases we'd uncovered led to a larger investigation that reached the state level. 12 officers were convicted, 37 cases were overturned, 4 murder convictions were vacated, families got their loved ones back. But there were costs. I'd spent most of my savings on legal fees. The town that had once known me as a cop now knew me as the man who'd broken the rules. My house had been broken into twice, a message I understood. I'd made enemies, people with power and money who didn't appreciate scrutiny. But Duke and I kept walking our morning trail. One morning, a year after everything had settled, we found something different. Not a person in hiding, but a memorial. Someone had carved a small wooden plaque and nailed it to a tree near where I'd found Sarah. It read simply, "Justice grows here, thank you." I never learned who put it there. Maybe it was Sarah. Maybe it was someone else we'd helped. Maybe it was just a stranger who'd heard the story and wanted to mark the place where something right had happened. Duke nudged my hand with his nose, the way he did when he knew I was thinking too hard. We finished our walk. The forest was quiet, peaceful, indifferent to justice or corruption or the choices a retired cop and his German shepherd had made. That was enough.